You know, I was wondering what to do with this little Pertronics vid as far as, you know, do I just tell you about what I'm doing with my car, or do I turn it into a more informative video? I've decided to turn it into more of an informative video, so it's going to be terribly, terribly long. I guess we call them the igniters. Anyway, this igniter, Pertronics Igniter 1, I purchased this little device right there back in the 1980s. It's never failed. There's plenty of videos out there where people who run these things and analyze other people's issues with them, they all go, it's, yeah, pretty much always somebody else's fault and not the creator's fault that these things don't work right. And yeah, I'm going to agree with that. When they fail, it's usually not the device. There's something else wrong somewhere. Alright, so what do we need to do? We need to look at what I've got set up here. Okay, I've got my timing gun. I'm going to point it nice and steady over here at my wheel. This is a degree wheel, what I'm about ready to show you guys. You can't do it with a stock pulley. You got to have a degree wheel. I've got a tripod that I can put my camera on. Snaps in right there. Oops, right there. I usually have it, I've got it set up kind of high at the moment. I don't usually keep it like that when I'm doing this. And I bring my camera right down in like this. And then I do the zoom because I've got a, unlike a cell phone camera which has a digital zoom, I've actually got an optical zoom, so I can zoom in real tight so that when we get upstairs to my computer we can take a look at the video in a frame-by-frame fashion. And that's what I want to do, and what I would ask you to do as well with your particular electronic ignition. Hey, if you want to do it with points, that would be great too, because I believe that the problem that I'm going to show you is inherent to every kind of distributor-based ignition system. I think, yeah, we should probably go up, take a look at that stuff, and then once I get done with that stuff, I'm going to kind of do a survey, smallish survey of electronic ignitions and how they compare back to this guy, the Pertronics Igniter 1. So let's go take a look at that. Alright, before we get started, should you choose to do this particular experiment on your own, you're going to want to keep your RPMs below 900, but very close to 900 RPMs, and here's why. So starting with the 900, okay, of course that means the piston's going to go to top dead center 900 times per minute. You've got 4 cylinders, so that means 4 times that. 3,600 top dead center events per minute. You get a spark every other time. So that's 1,800 spark events per minute, which means how many per second is that? So, well, there's 60 seconds in a minute. So divide it by 60. Let me just write the 60 down right there. The 0 is going to disappear. The 6 goes into the 18 3 times. We end up with 30 spark events per second. And what is the frame rate of your camera? 30 per second, which ends up giving you 1 spark event per frame. Makes it pretty easy to deal with. But if you go above 900, you end up getting 2 spark events. It makes it hard to interpret. If you're a little bit below 900, every now and then you get a blank frame. But that's easy. You get a blank frame, you just skip over it. So that's your target, just under 900 RPMs. Here's one of the little timing donuts that comes with your Pertronics 1 or your Pertronics 2. And with my particular car, I started putting it back together again back around 2015, 2016, something like that. And I, of course, was not completely trusting of a 30-year-old Pertronics to function once I actually started going out on the road, so I picked up an additional Pertronics. And I stuck it into my old distributor. I'm not sure whether this came out of my 73 or my 74, but as you can see, I've got the wires. There's the device and a donut. So I've got 2 of these donuts. And of course one's from the 1980s and one's from like 2015 or so, so they're about 30 years apart in their manufacturing. I've taken a pretty close look at the donuts. It looks like they're manufacturing the things the exact same way. So whatever they were doing back then, they're still doing now. So it's going to be, I think, a pretty fair comparison. But let's get over to the software and the video that was taken downstairs featuring my 2 donuts. Alright, so I take my editing software. This happens to be Movie Maker. It's just a free software. You can download, runs on Windows. we go in, we do our editing, and I would like to start with, I think we want to do cylinder number 3. Now, when I set the timing on my distributor, I use my cylinder number 1, but cylinder number 3, with this particular donut right there, I've got a little timing mark on, a little mark here. I don't have a mark on the other one. So this is my old one. And cylinder number 3 is going to be just easier to deal with. So let's take a look at what cylinder number 3 does. You want to go through and look for the spark. So there's my spark. And what you look at is just a mark. And you come back to your screen, and I've got a dry erase marker. And you can put dry erase markers on your screen. It's no big deal. You just put them on, then you wipe them off. Works just fine. So number 3, we'll put number 3 down here. Let's make sure that that's kind of accurate, so we'll go through a couple more of these.
That was pretty close. That was pretty close. That was pretty close. That was right on. That was right on. Right on. Right on. Right on.
Right on, okay. So, we know that this is a pretty good mark for my number 3, so let's label this one here as 3. That's kind of ugly. Let's try it again. There, number 3. Maybe you can see that. Actually, I've actually looked at the video. I think you guys can see this. Alright, now what I want to do is I want to look at every single spark, one after another. So right now I've got the timing lead is just sitting on spark plug number 3. I'm going to take it and put it onto the primary coil lead, which leads down to the distributor, so that you get every single one of them at the same time. So we come over to this part of the video. All of them, one after another. Let's find the number 3. Alright, there's a number 3. It's not super close.
Number 3. Number 3. Number 3.
Alright, so I may have bumped my tripod a little tiny bit. So let's change the number 3 slightly to its new location right there. And let's see how accurate that is.
That's pretty good. Not bad. Pretty close. Pretty close. Pretty close. That one's right on. That's right on.
Okay, now in your firing order, it's 1432. But if you rotate that slightly, it's 4321. Which means the next one's going to be number 2. So we go, and that's going to be number 2. We're going to put that mark up here. And let's call that one number 2. And then we go to number 1. Number 1's going to be down here. And we'll just simply say that's number 1. And then number 4. And there's number 4. So let's step through a few just to make sure that they kind of stay where they're supposed to be. Actually, let me label that. Let's put a 4 right there and point down to it. Okay, 3, 2, 1, 4. 3, 2, 1, 4. 3, 2, 1, 4. They're all pretty accurate. Okay, good. So we've got this particular donut labeled. I've got some timing marks. I'm going to read the various advancements off of these timing marks. And I'm going to put them into a spreadsheet. I'll get to it in just a second. But let's move over to the other donut and take a look at what the other donut does. Okay, this is an individual spark then. So I believe that this is cylinder number 1. So what mark do we want to use? Let's try, I don't know, let's try this top dead center mark. Number 1 is going to be, let's go down for number 1, and we'll call that one number 1. Alright, now we need to get to the part where I'm doing every one of them at the same time. Alright, there it is. We're doing all of them at the same time. See if I can find cylinder number 1. Okay, there's cylinder number 1. Let's see, 1 and 4. The 4 is going to be about right there. Maybe I'll label it. Let's see, let's go with 4 over there. That's kind of dark. You probably can't see it, but I can. 3. That looks like 3 is bounced all the way back over to here. That guy goes to number 3. And let's let's see, number 2. Number 2. Dash 2. Okay, so that means the other donut, my newer donut, has this particular spread. Let's verify that the hashes are pretty close to where they're supposed to be. Let's see, what do we got there? That goes back to 1. That's 4. Back to 3, and there's 2. 1, 4, 3, 2. 1, that's pretty close. 4, that's close. 3, that's close. And 2, that's close. Okay, so anyway, let's take a look right here. This guy is the number 2 cylinder. Look where the number 4 is, all the way back over here. That means that this little donut that's down there in the car right now, because this is a new one, what's down there in the car is the old one, that it's supposed to be triggering at the same point every single time. Now these 2 cylinders, 1 and 3, are pretty close. They're only off by about 1 degree. But number 4 and number 2, if you look at that, they're off by 6 degrees. I mean, that's actually, I think, a little tiny bit past 6 degrees. And it's not scatter. Scatter is a different effect. It's driven by additional other pieces of the mechanical assembly. This is a variance. This is a byproduct of the way they manufacture this little donut, and the fact that the little donut is really small diameter. What I was doing was I took my various timing marks and I put them into a spreadsheet. So here's my spreadsheet.
Let's get rid of the timing marks. I've already taken those marks and put them into the sheet, so we don't need them anymore. We just need to look at the spreadsheet.
So these are the timing marks from this one. This is my good one, so this is the best one that I got. The spread on this one is 3 1/4 degrees, which beats this about the 6 1/4 from the other one. My average, if you look at the advance, is 10 1/2 degrees. My cylinder number 1, which is the one I usually use for timing purposes, is at 11 1/2 degrees. So if I want my timing to be 10 1/2 degrees, I have to set my number 1 cylinder to 11 1/2 degrees. If I don't know the variance of my trigger, how can you set your timing accurately? So you need to know this stuff. One of the things you'll see that I've got a change between 1 and 3 and a change between 2 and 4. This impacts those of us like me who run dual single barrel setups. The dual single barrel setups like to idle primarily on cylinders 1 and 3. So you want your 1 and 3 cylinders to be timed pretty close to the same. So in my original configuration, my 1 and the 3 were off by about 2 3/4 degrees, and my 2 and 4 were off by 2 degrees. So I rotated my donut 90 degrees, and I went down and I redid the timing, and sure enough, everything came out the way it was supposed to. 1 and 3 was 2 degrees. These guys are 2 3/4. All the rest of the stuff stayed about the same. But given that I've rotated my thing, I now need to come up with what is my new timing mark for my number 1 cylinder, assuming that I want a 10-degree average, because I really do. I want to run about 10 degrees advance on this guy. That tells me that I need to run my number 1 cylinder at about 11 1/2 degrees, so it basically didn't change. I got lucky. But if I had the other donut, I would have to have changed it around a little bit. If you've got one of these guys and you investigate what's happening, you may want to rotate your donut as well, and you'd have to do something like this to find out what your average timing is. And one of the things about timing on these motors is that the average is really bad. Every single event needs to be pretty much right on. It's not good enough for it to be like, oh, on average it's about here. It's like, no. The average is bad. You've got a variance. This variance needs to drop. That should be no more than about 1.5 degrees tops. If you got a crank-fired system, I would imagine that you'd probably be pissed if this thing was off by even 1/4 degrees. So, that's one of the reasons why people say crank-fire is the best. You could conceivably get one of these things if you got lucky, and your donut might actually have just 1/4 degree variance. Congratulations. You hit the lottery. But anyway, one of the problems with these things is the diameter. So that's what this little piece is over here. All right, I've gone down and I've taken some measurements of this little donut right here. And it's actually about 24 millimeters in diameter. But the thickness of the plastic is about 1 millimeter, which means the magnets are sitting back in there at about 22 millimeters in diameter. That gives you a circumference that these magnets are rotating through of about 69 millimeters. The number of degrees for every millimeter of rotation, it's 5 degrees for every millimeter of rotation. The variance in millimeters for 1 degree is 0.19 of a millimeter. The variance in inches for 1 degree of change is 0.008, which means this magnet, if you want to change it by 1 degree, you have to vary the magnet by 0.008 of an inch. And even if you were to move the magnets around, if the magnet, this one is a little bit stronger than that one, the magnetic field might trigger it sooner. The magnetic field could trigger it later if it happens to be a little bit milder. So there's a lot of variability that comes into play on these little donuts. So how do you make them more accurate? You put a bigger donut in. Obviously, crank-fired systems, you stick them on the pulley, and your pulley's about that big, so it becomes very accurate. Like I say, I'm going to do a little bit of survey of some of this stuff, but Pertronics purchased Computronics a while back. So the Computronics, which has a little disc that is about, it's at least double the diameter of that. It's going to be a more accurate system. We'll take a look at it. Well, for this part of the video, you don't need to be looking over my shoulder, so I'm just going to do some screen capturing. So first of all, you got your Pertronics, like I do. You're not happy with your magnetic sleeve. Notice that they call it a sleeve. I just call it a big donut. Anyway, you can pick up a donut for $21. I think that's a bit outrageous. This is what I got. $85, you get your basic Pertronics, the Igniter 1. You could upgrade to the Igniter 2 for about $135. You'll see a couple things in here where it's capable of tracking the RPM, entire RPM range, So somewhere in here it's got a little chip that allows it to tell how fast it's going. 4 times more available energy. To get that, you must upgrade your coil to a lower resistance coil rather than a 3 ohm, like an 1.5 ohm coil. But no matter what you do, it still has the magnetic sleeve donut. So if they haven't been able to compensate for the variance, it's still going to be variance, just like the Igniter 1. To the Igniter 3. And I want you to notice something real nice about these photos over here, that it doesn't have a donut. So they have done something different with the Igniter 3 to trigger it. And if you look at this device right down in there, I'm not entirely sure what they're doing. I have a couple of thoughts about what they're doing in order to pick up. But clearly what they're doing is they're monitoring the actual distributor spindle itself. So perhaps the machining of the spindle is more accurate than their donuts. And if it is, whatever they're doing here, the Igniter 3, has the potential to be more accurate, but I don't know. I don't run these. There's a guy out there who does. Maybe he'll be kind enough to run the test on his vehicle and let us know what he finds. That would be outstanding. Now, one of the things that I told you is that you need a larger diameter pickup. So we come back over here to the compu-fire, Computronics, I don't care, it's a compu-fire. Ignition model, module $104. Okay, has the potential to be more accurate. As far as I know, this thing's got the same basic electronic capabilities as the Igniter 1. It's just going to be like an Igniter 1, but it potentially is more accurate. So let's take a look at how we can play around but not break the bank. All right, you can go to EMPI, and EMPI also has a clone of this guy. The EMPI clone is $49 over here at SIP1. But how about a clone of the clone? All right, so over here at Amazon, you can actually find this particular device for a little bit cheaper elsewhere. But the trick with Amazon is that I need to get some fishing stuff, so I'm probably going to lump something like this in with a fishing supply order. So this works for me. But keep in mind, you can buy it for a couple bucks less elsewhere. But this is just an absolutely super generic Chinese clone of the Petronix one for $25. And look, a new donut for $25, so I can get a device that I can play around with and another donut that I can also play around with for $25. For $29, roughly $30, they have a compu-tronics clone that you can pick up. Let's take a look at, that's a better look at what they've got. Wiring, everything else, the rotor, the works, and all that for $30. And so I think that this is also worthy of a potential investigation. I mean, you're not spending a whole heck of a lot of money. So long as it works, you can test it. $30, it's worth it. Maybe I'll do that. Now, somebody did send me a message, one of those very, very rare questions that I get on my videos. Somebody inquired about the black box from CB Performance. And I do like the black box. I've been looking at it for years, and I've never pulled the trigger on it because if you come down here, it will connect to ignition points. That's the factory stuff. Aftermarket ignition modules such as the compu-fire and the Petronix. Now, if the compu-fire and the Petronix have the variance that I'm showing you guys, that variance simply gets passed into the black box. So you get this fancy black box, but the triggers are all screwed up. It all depends on how well the black box has been coated to handle stuff like that. And I don't think CB Performance has actually built anything into their box that will allow you to handle the variance in the triggers. I just don't think that they've done it. I have looked and looked and looked. There are very few people on the YouTube space that have this. There's a guy out in California. He's got, I think, one attached to his Type 4 bug. And it's just a really fancy way of timing a mess. So I've never done it. I need to get the scatter, number one, taken out of the way. And two, I've got to get rid of this variance. I mean, you could go to crank trigger, but I don't really want to do that. I like the look of the 1980s for this particular car that I'm running now, my 73. I just like the 80s look. So let's take a look at some of the competitors for the black box. So I looked around and looked around and looked around, and the only thing I could really find was the MSD. And it's actually a little bit more powerful than the CB box. One of the things I don't like about it is it doesn't have a built-in vacuum component. You can attach it, like if you've got a remote vacuum sensor, you take the outputs from that and you can dump it into the box, but it's a little bit too much and it's insanely expensive. I don't actually have $534.95 plus shipping to pick one of these things up, so that's, I think, out of the question. I found others that were even more expensive than this, so I'm not going to go down that road. They've got essentially the same features as this. Some of them have a little bit more, some of them a little bit less, and they're all up here in the $400 to $500 to $700 range. Okay, at this point, we start heading into distributors. Now, if I can't get my distributor from my old car to do what I want, I think I'm leaning more towards picking up something like this, $239. This comes with the Igniter 3. I wouldn't pull the trigger on this guy right here unless I knew that the Igniter 3 had some internal mechanism for compensating for the variance of the triggering point. All right, so after looking at the black box, we say, well, what else can we do with CB Performance? And it turns out they've got a MagnaSpark 2 distributor. I'm not going to run one of these things because that doesn't have any vacuum input. But inside this is a triggering mechanism. Incidentally, you can also get these things in black. But I want to know, is that triggering mechanism accurate? And I know that there are people out there that run these things. Oh, wow, they're so fantastic. They're terrific. But that doesn't tell me anything. I want to know whether or not they've got built into this thing a problem with variance. I dug around a whole bunch of pictures. I finally found somebody who took a picture of the inside mechanism. This happens to be an older MagnaSpark. You can tell it's older based on what you're looking at right there. This does not match. Let me see if I can find it. This is the kind of triggering mechanism they stick in the new ones. We'll get back to that in just a second. But as you can see in here, it's got this little 4-lugged doodad that's going round and round and round. Obviously, it contains some kind of a magnetic thing, a bob, whatever, inside this guy right here. It's triggering. You can see that the diameter of this thing is slightly bigger than what you'll get with the Variance, but it looks to me to be on about the same diameter as you would get with the compu-fire. So, is it more accurate than a compu-fire? I have no idea. But there are some of you out there who have these things. You could always do the test on one of these and let us know. Okay, again, looking at this guy right here, you can just kind of see that it's got a fairly decent sized diameter. It beats the Variance igniter, but it doesn't necessarily beat the compu-fire. They've got the digital, and I've considered the digital one as well, but I've never seen a picture of the inside of this thing. I don't know what it's doing as far as triggering goes, but I imagine that inside there is the exact same kind of trigger that you've got on the other MagnaSpark, which means it has the potential to have a variance problem. In addition to that, I don't actually want to spend $360 something for one of these things. And since you're ordering it from CB Performance, they're going to cost you $100 to ship it. All right, something else I want you to notice about the black box. Yeah, this shows you how you connect. You see this guy right here? This is a serial connection. It's like, come on, CB Performance. You know, people stopped using serial connections back in the 1990s. Everything is either Wi-Fi or Bluetooth nowadays. So when I was doing my survey of distributors, I ran across this one right here, the Mallory. It's discontinued. Mallory was bought by MSD, and MSD is now owned by Holly. But one thing that's unique about this particular distributor, it's the only one I've ever been able to find that is triggered optically, which I thought was pretty cool. So if you can find one, apparently they're supposed to be outstanding. But yeah, I think you're probably, even used one of these is probably in the $400 to $500 range. Let's take a quick look at the billet Pertronics with the Igniter 3. Notice that it is a non-vacuum distributor, so I'm going to say, man, 2 thumbs down on that guy. No point in spending that kind of money if you can't get the vacuum. I don't know how many of you have heard of these guys. This is Ignition 123. I believe they're out of Holland, somewhere over in Europe. Anyway, it's got an internal programmable system. It effectively becomes kind of like CB Performance's programmable, what do they call it, the MagnaSpark 2 programmable. So it would be a substitute for that. $465, fairly pricey, but people who have it say it is outstanding. Let's take a look at the inside real quick. Take a look at that rotor. It's got a magnetic trigger right there. It's inside an aluminum. Well, the machining on that is just beautiful. But anyway, it's probably pretty accurate. It's got the wide-spaced magnetic triggers. So that would certainly be a potential option. Well, the video has to end at some point in time. So here's where I currently stand. This is my old distributor with the vacuum canister that is broken. That needs to be replaced. Inside there is the new Igniter 1 with the new donut. So I'm going to take my old donut and put it in there, get it an alternative vacuum canister, hook it up to my carbs. I get the feeling that I should probably try and do something with my spark plug wires. I mean, they were supposed to be radio frequency suppressed, but maybe they're not, and maybe some of my scattering problem is being created by the wires. Just hard to know. But anyway, this video is about not scatter, but about the variance. So yeah, if you go out and do this and you've got variance, put it down in the comments. Say, hey Scott, I've got blah 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 whatever, and here's my variance, and then just write them down. Like number 1 was 10 degrees, number 2 was 12, number 3 was 9, and whatever. Of course, you got to tell what you got. So it was this whatever distributor, it was this kind of an electronic ignition. Who knows? Anyway, if you got to this point in the vid, thanks for watching. More later.